There is a saying among my people. When the ground shakes, do not look up, look at where the herd is running. I did not fully understand that saying until I was standing on the communications deck of Relay Station Vethakara, watching a distress signal repeat itself on my secondary monitor for the third time in 4 minutes. And I did not truly understand it, down in the bones, in the way that changes you, until the humans arrived. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. That is, after all, how stories are supposed to be told. My name is Grakvil Sor. I am, or was at the time of these events, a third-caste liaison officer for the Iridian Unified Command, assigned to Relay Station Vethakara, which sat at the edge of the Cauldrus Expanse. It was not a prestigious posting. Relay stations rarely are. We were essentially a very expensive piece of communications equipment with a staff of 31 beings attached to it to make sure it kept running. The Cauldrus Expanse itself is not a place anyone visits for pleasure. It is a wide swath of contested space, some 700 light-minutes across at its widest point, with 3 different trade corridors cutting through it like rivers through a salt flat. The Iridians claimed it. The Veth Combine claimed it. The Drashari hegemony made occasional noises about claiming it whenever they needed something to complain about in a trade summit. And then there were the Karog. The Karog do not claim things, they take them. If you have not heard of the Karog, consider yourself fortunate. They are a species that evolved in the heavy gravity crush of a binary star system, which means they are built like something that was never meant to stop moving. Wide, dense, plates of natural chitin over layered muscle, with forearms that end in grasping claws and a jaw structure that can bite through the hull plating of a light transport if given enough time and motivation. Their ships are ugly, built for function in the way that an axe is built for function, all edges and angles with nothing wasted on appearance. They had been expanding steadily for 2 decades, and the Cauldrus Expanse was exactly the kind of place they liked. Contested enough that the major powers were always too busy arguing with each other to coordinate a defense. So that was the landscape. That was my assignment. A relay station at the edge of a contested expanse between 3 squabbling governments and 1 very aggressive species that had been quietly pressing inward for 20 years. I had been at Vethakara for 11 months when everything changed. The first indication was a merchant vessel. The Pale Horizon, a mid-class freighter registered to a Veth Combine trading consortium, running a standard cargo route from the Drashari inner worlds toward the Iridian frontier. She was carrying processed minerals, some agricultural chemicals, 4 passengers, and a crew of 12. She had filed her flight plan. She was 2 days out from her destination. Everything was ordinary. Then her emergency beacon activated. I was eating when the alert came in. I remember this detail because it is the kind of thing you remember, the small, ordinary moment that exists right before everything falls apart. I was eating a bowl of pressed grain with something approximating hot sauce that technician Velora made from a recipe she had apparently learned from a human trader who passed through 3 years prior. It was better than it sounds. The alarm was a flat, repeating tone, 2-tone, emergency grade but not critical. My junior officer, a young Iridian named Sefvel who had been with the station for only 2 months, looked up from his console and gave me the expression that junior officers give when they are unsure whether to panic. I told him to pull up the beacon data. Beacon origin, the Pale Horizon, he said, reading from his screen. She is transmitting emergency code 77 Alpha, requesting immediate assistance. Location is, he paused. His crest feathers, the small, iridescent ones that Iridians have along the ridgeline of their skulls, went flat. She is inside the Karog pressure zone. I stopped eating. The Karog pressure zone was not an official designation. It was what we called the region approximately 40 light minutes inside the Cauldrus Expanse from the current Karog territorial boundary. In the past 18 months, 3 vessels that had transmitted emergency signals from inside that zone had never been recovered. 2 of them we later confirmed had been boarded. What happened to the crews was not something that made for pleasant reading. I went to Sefvel's console and read the beacon data myself. The Pale Horizon had suffered a drive failure, not catastrophic, but enough to drop her out of faster-than-light travel and leave her coasting on maneuvering thrusters. She had minimal power. She had 4 passengers and a crew of 12. And she was 68 light minutes inside the Karog pressure zone, which meant she was entirely inside range of 2 Karog patrol wings that our scouts had tracked over the previous week. I ran the numbers. I always run the numbers. It is the first thing they teach you as a liaison officer. Get the numbers before you make any commitments, because commitments made without numbers have a way of getting people killed. The numbers were not good. The nearest Iridian combat vessel was the patrol frigate Quetzalera, and she was currently on the far edge of her patrol loop. Best possible intercept time was 6 hours and 40 minutes. The Veth Combine had a fast response cutter in the region, but she was unarmed, and her captain had already declined 2 previous rescue requests in the pressure zone, citing insurance regulations that I will not bother repeating because they were insulting enough the first time I read them. The Drashari had nothing nearby. And the Karog? Our last tracking data put a Karog patrol element 43 light minutes from the Pale Horizon's current position. At standard Karog patrol speed, they would reach her in approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes. 6 hours 40 for the nearest friendly vessel, 4 hours 20 for the Karog. The math was simple, the math was brutal. Send the distress relay to Iridian Command, I told Sefvel. Standard priority. Include my assessment of intercept times. I was already walking back to my own console. Then open a channel to the Quetzalera directly. I want to speak to her captain. And the Combine cutter. I thought about the insurance regulations. Don't bother. I spent 17 minutes talking to Captain Orath of the Quetzalera. She was a good officer, older than me by perhaps a decade of galactic standard years, steady under pressure, the kind of person who gave you a direct answer without embellishing it. She told me she was already pushing her engines to their safe limit. She also told me, without saying so in so many words, that she did not think she was going to reach the Pale Horizon in time. What about reinforcements? I asked. Is there anything from command that could assist? Closest additional asset is the cruiser Vethoraxal, she said. She is 8 hours out at maximum. I have already requested she move to intercept, but... 8 hours, I said. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. I will keep my channel open, Captain Orath said. If anything changes, contact me immediately. She signed off, and I was left with the numbers again. 4 hours 20, 6 hours 40. 16 souls aboard a drifting ship in a zone where the Karog had already made their intentions very clear. I sent the relay to command. I documented my assessment. I did everything that protocol required. And then I did something that was not exactly in protocol, but that I had standing authorization to do in emergency situations. I opened a channel on the auxiliary emergency frequency, the one that all registered vessels in the Caldris Expanse were required to monitor, and I transmitted a general assistance request. Not a full distress signal, not a military request, which would have required higher authorization than I had. Just an open call on the emergency frequency, with the location and situation of the Pale Horizon, and a request for any vessels in range with defensive capability to respond if able. It was, if I am being entirely honest, something of a gesture, a formality. In my 11 months at Vethakara, I had sent 2 similar general assistance requests. Both times the result had been silence. I sent the request. I went back to monitoring the Karog patrol element. I began composing a very difficult message to the families of 16 people I was not at all certain I was going to be able to help. The response came 47 minutes later. I nearly missed it. I was deep in the composition of that message, choosing words carefully, because words in messages like that matter enormously, and Sefvel was the one who caught the incoming signal. "Liaison officer," he said, and something in his voice made me look up immediately. Not alarm, something else. Something I had never quite heard from him before. I think it was bewilderment. "We have a response on the auxiliary emergency frequency," he said. "From whom?" He checked his screen twice. I could see his crest feathers doing something complicated, rising and flattening in rapid alternation, which in Iridian body language means something between "I don't understand this" and "please tell me you are seeing what I am seeing." "It is from a human vessel," he said. He paused, reading the name carefully. "The UEFS Permanent Dawn." I frowned. "United Earth Forces ship, human military. What class?" "It is not a class I have in my recognition database," Sefvel said. He was pulling up additional information as he spoke, and his crest feathers were doing the bewilderment thing again. She is identifying herself as a transport. But the hull registry codes attached to her signal suggest she may be registered to something called, another pause, the 83rd Combined Arms Battalion. A transport, I repeated, a troop transport. Possibly. I moved to his console and read the signal myself. It was brief. Blunt, actually, humans tend toward bluntness in their communications, which I had always found somewhat startling until I got used to it. The message said, Relay Station VETH Okara. This is Colonel ADAEZ OKAFOR, Commanding Officer, United Earth FORCES 83RD Combined Arms Battalion, aboard transport vessel UEFS Permanent Dawn. We received your general assistance request. Please confirm distress vessel location and threat assessment. We are in range. We can respond. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the source coordinates the signal had arrived from and ran a quick calculation. The UEFS Permanent Dawn was approximately 96 light minutes from the position of the pale horizon, at a reasonable speed for a transport vessel. How fast are human military transports? I asked Sefvel. He looked it up. His crest feathers went through an entire sequence that I was not sure I had seen before. Faster than I expected, he said carefully. I sent a response to Colonel Ockafer. I confirmed the distress vessel location. I included our tracking data on the Kerog patrol element. And I was honest with her. I told her that we had a 6-hour 40 friendly intercept from a combat frigate, a 4-hour 20 hostile estimate from Kerog patrols, and 16 souls on a drifting ship. The response came back in 11 minutes. Confirmed, we are altering course now. Estimated arrival, 3 hours 14 minutes. Please advise IRIDIAN Command that the 83RD will be operating in this area. We would appreciate coordination, but it is not required. Colonel OKAFOR out. I stared at that last line for a long moment. It is not required. I had been in liaison work for 8 years. I had worked with representatives of 11 different species. I could not recall any military officer from any species ever telling me that coordination with the local authority was not required. It was not arrogance exactly, it was something else. A self-sufficiency that was almost jarring. 3 hours 14 minutes, Sefvel said slowly. That is faster than the Kerog. Yes, I said. By over an hour. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What does a combined arms battalion mean in human military terms? I did not know the precise answer to that question. I told him so, and I opened our reference database on human military structure while I contacted Captain Orath to update her on the development. What I found in the database was informative. A United Earth Forces Combined Arms Battalion was, according to the entry, a combined unit typically consisting of infantry, armor support, engineering assets, communications specialists, field medical staff, and various attached specialty elements, totaling, at full strength, somewhere between 800 and 1,200 personnel. The entry noted that the composition varied considerably depending on mission profile. 800 to 1,200 personnel. On a transport vessel, I thought about the pale horizon, about her distress beacon repeating quietly in the background of my console, and I thought about 16 souls on a drifting ship, and I thought about the Kerog patrol element 4 hours and 20 minutes away. And then I thought about what 16 Kerog patrol fighters would encounter if they arrived to find an entire human battalion waiting for them. I sent the update to Captain Orath. I could almost hear her reaction through the silence of the channel before she replied. A battalion, she said finally. Yes. They called for reinforcements, she said very quietly, and we sent a battalion. They sent themselves, I said. We didn't call anyone, the General Assistance Request. I know what the General Assistance Request says. A pause. Grackful, do the humans understand what they're heading into? I provided Colonel Ockafer with the full threat assessment. And she said coordination was not required. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Forward me everything, Captain Orath said. Everything. I want to know everything that happens out there. The next 3 hours were the longest of my professional life. I maintained monitoring on everything I could. The Kerog patrol element, which our tracking showed was accelerating, which meant they had likely picked up the Pale Horizon's beacon themselves. The Pale Horizon, still drifting, still transmitting, with 16 souls and minimal power. The UEFS Permanent Dawn, moving at a speed that I kept double-checking because it did not seem right for a vessel classified as a transport, and yet the numbers kept saying the same thing. At approximately 2 hours 30 minutes into the wait, I received a secondary transmission from Colonel Ockhaffer. It was brief. Relay Station VETH Okara. Please advise, what is the standard KARRAGH response to a vessel that declines boarding? Colonel OKAFOR. I looked at that question for a long time. The standard KAROG response to a vessel that declines boarding is not something I enjoyed putting into words. I wrote it out anyway because she had asked, and because she deserved the information. The short version, the KAROG did not consider refusal to be a valid option. If a vessel refused boarding, the KAROG applied what they called necessary pressure to change the vessel's decision. This typically began with weapons fire on non-essential systems, engine nacelles, communication arrays, life support redundancies, and escalated from there depending on how long the resistance continued. The end result in the cases we had documented was always the same. I sent the information. I added because it seemed relevant. The Pale Horizon has minimal power. She cannot maneuver. She cannot resist boarding. The response from Colonel Ockhaffer was 4 words. Understood, we will hurry. At approximately 1 hour 20 minutes from the estimated arrival of the UEFS Permanent Dawn, something unexpected happened. The KAROG patrol element changed course. This was not in itself remarkable. Patrol elements change course for many reasons. But the new heading they adopted was not toward the Pale Horizon. It was not a redirect around some obstacle or a shift to another patrol grid. They were heading directly toward the UEFS Permanent Dawn. Sefvel spotted it first. He looked up from his console with an expression I recognized, not quite fear, but close. The look of someone doing math and not liking the answer. They have detected the incoming vessel, he said. Yes. They are moving to intercept. Yes. How many ships in the KAROG patrol element? I checked the tracking data. 16 fighters, 2 escort corvettes. Sefvel's crest feathers went completely flat. In Iridian body language, that is not bewilderment. That is something closer to dread. A transport vessel, he said, against 16 KAROG fighters and 2 corvettes. And whatever infantry they have aboard, I said. He stared at me. Infantry does not help in a space engagement. No, I said. It does not. I opened a channel to Colonel Ockhaffer and transmitted the updated tactical picture. The KAROG course change, the composition of the intercepting force, the distance and estimated contact time. I was, if I am being honest, expecting something. A request for confirmation, perhaps. A revised assessment of whether the mission was viable. An acknowledgement that the situation had changed and that a transport vessel should not be engaging 16 KAROG fighters and 2 corvettes. What I received instead was a transmission that I have kept a copy of in my personal archive ever since. Relay Station VETH Okara, acknowledged. Please advise the KARRAGH patrol element that they are approaching a vessel that is currently operating in response to a distress signal, and that any hostile action against either the Permanent Dawn or the Pale Horizon will be met with appropriate force. If you have an open channel to the KARRAGH commander, please transmit this message directly. If not, transmit on any frequency they monitor. Colonel OKAFOR. I read it twice. She wants us to warn the KAROG, Sefvel said. Yes. She is in a transport vessel with... He stopped. He seemed to be reconsidering something. How many personnel on a full-strength combined arms battalion? 800 to 1200, I said. He thought about this, and the Permanent Dawn. She is 1 vessel. Yes. Against 16 fighters and 2 corvettes. Yes. And she wants to warn the KAROG. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the 4 words, we will hurry. And I thought about the confident flatness of coordination is not required. And I thought about the way Colonel Ockhaffer had asked a precise, specific question about KAROG boarding procedures, and had immediately said understood when I answered. She is not warning them as a negotiation tactic, I said slowly. She is warning them because she believes in giving an adversary the chance to withdraw before committing to a conflict. It is, I searched for the right word. It is a formality. She already knows what she is going to do. Sefvel stared at me. She is one vessel, he said again. Send the warning, I said, to the Karog frequency, exactly as she wrote it. We sent the warning to the Karog. There is a standard Karog response to messages they consider impertinent. It involves a great deal of formal language that translates, approximately, to "we reject your pretensions" and will demonstrate the consequences of your presumption. It is essentially 16 flavors of no. The Karog sent that response. Then they continued on their intercept course. I transmitted their response to Colonel Ockhaffer. I included a translation note in case the nuance was lost across language systems. The reply came back almost immediately. Understood, thank you for trying, Colonel OKAFOR. And then, 43 minutes before the UEFS Permanent Dawn was scheduled to reach the pale horizon, she arrived at the intercept point, the place in space where the Karog and the humans were going to meet. I know what happened next partly from the sensor data that Vethakara was able to collect at that range, and partly from the after-action report that Colonel Ockhaffer filed through Iridian channels 3 days later. I am going to tell it the way I understand it, which is to say, imperfectly, with gaps, and with the full acknowledgement that there are parts of what happened out there that I do not think I am fully equipped to understand. The UEFS Permanent Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a range of approximately 11,000 kilometers from the leading elements of the Karog Patrol formation. 11,000 kilometers sounds like a great distance. In space combat terms, it is not. For context, the effective weapons range of a Karog escort corvette is approximately 45,000 kilometers. The Permanent Dawn had arrived well inside the Karog engagement envelope. Our sensor data showed the Permanent Dawn briefly, a single return, large for a transport, with an energy signature that was slightly higher than standard for a vessel of her listed class. Then the Karog opened fire. We saw the weapons signatures light up on our long-range sensors. 16 fighters and 2 corvettes opening up on a single transport vessel. The energy readings were significant. The Karog were not making a warning shot. I will not pretend I was calm in that moment. I had spent 3 hours watching these events develop. I had exchanged messages with Colonel Ockhaffer. I had read her transmission about appropriate force and about giving an adversary the chance to withdraw, and something about the matter-of-fact precision of her communications had made her feel real to me in a way that distant military actors often do not. She was not an abstract coordinate on my tracking system. She was a person who had said, "We will hurry." I watched the weapons signatures bloom on my screen, and I thought, this is not going to go the way she expected. And then the Permanent Dawn moved. I want to be careful how I describe this, because sensor data at long range is imprecise, and I do not want to overstate what I actually observed versus what was later confirmed in after-action analysis. But what our sensors showed, in the immediate seconds after the Karog opened fire, was this. The Permanent Dawn did not attempt to evade. She accelerated toward the Karog formation. There is a concept in human military doctrine. I looked it up afterward, because I needed to understand what I was watching, called closing the distance. It refers to the tactical principle that in certain engagements, the optimal response to incoming weapons fire is not to create distance but to reduce it, because many weapon systems are optimized for a specific range band and become less effective either significantly closer or further than their design parameters. Closing the distance is a calculated aggression. It says, your weapons work best at this range, so we will not stay at this range. The Permanent Dawn closed the distance at a speed that was absolutely not consistent with her listed classification as a transport vessel. I noted this discrepancy in my logs at the time and raised it with Sefvel, who simply stared at me without any response because he was too busy watching the same sensor data. She closed to approximately 900 kilometers before she returned fire. What she returned fire with is something that I spent considerable time researching afterward, and I will admit that the full picture is still not entirely clear to me because human military vessel specifications are not always publicly available. What I can tell you is what our sensors showed. A weapons signature that was large, sustained, and utterly out of scale with what any transport vessel should be capable of producing. Sefvel said very quietly, "That is not a transport." "No," I agreed. "Then what is it?" I did not have an answer for him, not at that moment. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is easy to read past it. A Karog patrol element, 16 fighters and 2 escort corvettes, which represent a significant offensive capability, engaged a single human vessel that had officially arrived in the area to respond to a merchant vessel's distress signal. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. At the end of those 11 minutes, the sensor data showed the following. 7 Karog fighters had broken off engagement and were withdrawing at maximum speed. 4 fighters had been disabled. Their energy signatures were gone, which meant power failure or destruction, and at that range we could not differentiate. 5 fighters were still in the vicinity but not presenting active weapons signatures, which in standard doctrine means they had either surrendered or were no longer combat capable. Both corvettes had also gone silent, though one of them we later confirmed had executed an emergency FTL jump rather than continue the engagement. The UEFS Permanent Dawn was still moving, still at full power. She had taken hits. Our sensor data showed fluctuations in her energy signature consistent with weapons impacts, but she was still moving at the same speed she had been when she arrived. She resumed course toward the pale horizon. I did not speak for some time after the engagement ended. I think Sefvel was in a similar state. We were both watching our consoles, watching the same data, doing the same math. A Karog patrol element is not an insignificant force. 2 escort corvettes and 16 fighters represent a commitment of resources that the Karog do not make casually. In the previous 2 years, a Karog patrol element of that size had been responsible for. I had to look this up later, 9 confirmed interdictions of civilian vessels, and 4 engagements with minor military assets, all of which the Karog had won. 11 minutes. I opened a channel to Captain Orath. She did not say anything when I connected. She had been monitoring on her own sensors for the past hour, and I think she had already seen most of what I was looking at. "Grakville," she said finally. "Captain, they called for reinforcements," she said, "and they sent themselves." It was almost exactly what she had said before, but it felt different now. Less observation, more I am not sure. Something between astonishment and something that I did not have a precise Iridian word for. "Yes," I said. "How many humans are on that ship?" I looked at the classification data again. 800 to 1200 for a full-strength battalion, I told her. She was quiet for a long moment. "The Karog," she said. "They see one vessel. They think one vessel, whatever its capabilities, has limits. You can surround it. You can keep engaging until you find those limits. That is how the Karog think." "Yes," I said. "But the humans," she paused. "The humans are not one vessel. They are a battalion that happens to be on one vessel. That is a different thing." I thought about Colonel Ockaffer's message. Any hostile action will be met with appropriate force. The word appropriate had seemed strange to me when I first read it. I had thought it was perhaps a translation artifact, a word that carried different weight in the original English. But sitting with Captain Orath's observation, I started to think that appropriate had been the exactly correct word after all. What is the appropriate force for a Karog patrol element that is attempting to board a drifting civilian vessel with 16 souls aboard? Apparently, for the 83rd Combined Arms Battalion, the answer had been, whatever it took, delivered faster than the Karog expected. The Permanent Dawn reached the pale horizon 41 minutes later. We monitored the communication traffic in the area. Most of it was on the civilian emergency frequencies. The pale horizon's crew and passengers, who had been listening to the engagement from approximately 30,000 kilometers away with, one assumes, very complicated feelings. The first transmission from the pale horizon after the Permanent Dawn arrived was brief and slightly incoherent in the way of transmissions made by people who have been very frightened for a very long time and are only beginning to process that the fear is ending. The Permanent Dawn's response was calmer. I have the transcript. I have kept it because it matters, I think, for understanding what this event was about, not just in strategic terms, but in the more human sense. The Pale Horizon, UEFS Permanent Dawn, this is Lieutenant Commander Nneka Fasanya, Executive Officer. We are coming alongside. Please confirm life support status and number of souls aboard. The pale horizon, oh God. Oh, yes, life support is functional, but we are on reserve power. We have 16 souls, all alive. The drive failure, we are adrift. We heard you out there. What? UEFS Permanent Dawn, 16 souls, all alive. Good, don't worry about what you heard. Is anyone injured? The pale horizon, 3 with minor injuries. Nothing critical, but the Karog were. UEFS Permanent Dawn, the Karog are gone. Focus on your people. We are going to come alongside and get a tow line on you, and then we are going to get you out of this zone. Okay. The pale horizon, yes. Yes, okay, thank you. Who are you? You're human. UEFS Permanent Dawn, yes, ma'am, we are human. The pale horizon, 1 ship, you came alone. UEFS Permanent Dawn, we were the closest thing available. A pause in the transcript, 3 seconds, then. The pale horizon, 1 ship. UEFS Permanent Dawn, we brought a full battalion. We just keep them inside. I have listened to that exchange many times. I think about the woman on the pale horizon. I later learned her name was Captain F. Roseman, a veteran freight operator who had been running this particular trade corridor for 11 years. I think about what those 3 hours must have been like for her. The drive failure, the beacon, the calculations about Karog arrival times, the sound of a space engagement happening close enough to feel real even across the vacuum. And then the silence. And then a human voice saying, we brought a full battalion, we just keep them inside. The Permanent Dawn took the pale horizon under tow approximately 2 hours later. The repairs needed to get the pale horizon's drive functional again required parts that the freighter did not carry, so the tow was necessary. A slow, careful extraction from the Cauldrus pressure zone. Captain Orath and the Keth Solera met them at the edge of the zone. Captain Orath filed a report with Iridian Command that went through 11 layers of command structure in approximately 4 hours, faster than any report I had seen travel in my 8 years of service. Command wanted to know exactly what had happened, exactly what assets the humans had used, and exactly what the current status of the Karog patrol element was. I spent 2 days preparing supplemental documentation, sensor logs, communication transcripts, my own observations and analysis. The after-action report that Colonel Ockaffer had filed through Iridian channels arrived partway through this process, and I read it very carefully. It was thorough, it was precise. It was written in the same matter-of-fact tone as Colonel Ockaffer's transmissions throughout the event. The part that I kept returning to was the section on the engagement itself. She described the Karog intercept. She described the decision to close distance rather than attempt evasion or withdrawal. She described the weapons engagement, 11 minutes, and the language she used for those 11 minutes was as flat and procedural as everything else she wrote. And then, at the end of the engagement section, she wrote a single paragraph that I have thought about more than any other part of the document. She wrote, "It should be noted that the primary mission objective of this response was the safety of the 16 souls aboard the distress vessel Pale Horizon, not the engagement of Karog patrol assets. The engagement was a necessary precondition to the primary objective. Had the Karog patrol element chosen to withdraw after receiving the standard warning, no engagement would have occurred. The responsibility for the engagement rests with the Karog patrol element, which chose to advance against an expressed warning and to pose a continued threat to a vessel operating in response to a civilian distress signal. This command had no interest in a conflict with Karog patrol assets. This command had significant interest in the welfare of the 16 souls aboard the Pale Horizon. These 2 facts, in combination, determined the outcome. These 2 facts in combination determined the outcome. I have read military documents from 11 different species over my 8 years in liaison work. I have read a great many after-action reports and strategic assessments and command justifications. I cannot think of a single document that distilled the logic of a military engagement so cleanly and so completely into 9 words. These 2 facts in combination determined the outcome. The formal diplomatic conversations about what happened in the Cauldrus expanse took several months. The Karog filed a formal protest with the Iridian Unified Command, alleging that the Permanent Dawn had engaged their patrol element without provocation. I was involved in the process of responding to that protest, and I will not pretend it was not complicated. International, Intergalactic diplomacy almost always is. But there was one thing that was not complicated about it. The Pale Horizon and her 16 souls made port safely. Captain F. Roseman and her crew and passengers had a story to tell that spread through the Caldris trade community faster than any official report. Stories always do. People who work the trade corridors talk to each other, and the story of the human vessel that came alone and drove off a Karog patrol element and towed a drifting freighter out of the pressure zone, that story traveled. I heard a version of it back from a Veth Combine trader 6 months after the event, told to me as though I had never heard it before, with certain details that had changed in transit and certain details that had, remarkably, survived completely intact. The detail that survived was the exchange. One ship and we brought a full battalion, we just keep them inside. Something about that line seemed to stick in people's minds. I understood why. I had been monitoring it in real time, watching the sensor data and the transmissions, and even with all of that context, even having been in a small way part of what happened, I found myself thinking about those words in quiet moments, on long shifts, in the spaces between tasks where the mind wanders without direction. We brought a full battalion, we just keep them inside. I met Colonel Adiz Akafar in person, approximately 4 months after the event. The Permanent Dawn was scheduled to pass through the Caldris expanse on a different assignment, and Command had arranged a coordination meeting at Vethakara, partly for legitimate operational reasons, and partly, I suspect, because several of my superiors wanted to look at the woman and the vessel responsible for what they had taken to calling, in informal channels, the Caldris incident. She was not what I expected. This is, I realize, something of a cliché when describing a first meeting with a person one has been building a mental image of, but it is true. I had assembled a picture of Colonel Akafar from her transmissions. The precision, the brevity, the flat acknowledgement of difficult information followed immediately by decisive action, and I had expected someone who matched those qualities in obvious ways. Someone who projected authority the way a weapons system projects its targeting sensor. She was a tall woman, dark-skinned, with close-cut hair and a manner that I can only describe as still. Not cold, not at all cold, actually. She smiled when she shook my hand, which is the human greeting gesture I have always found slightly alarming until I remember that it means warmth, not threat. She asked about Sefvel, whom she apparently knew by name because he had been the one handling most of the communications traffic on the night in question. She brought a small gift from the Pale Horizon's captain, a letter, handwritten, which Captain Roseman had sent through formal channels addressed specifically to the crew of Vethakara, thanking us for the general assistance request that had reached the Permanent Dawn. I had not expected that. We were a relay station. We had transmitted a signal. It seemed disproportionate to receive formal thanks for it. Colonel Akafar noticed my expression when I read the letter. "You didn't think you'd done much," she said. "We sent a signal," I said. "We are a relay station. Sending signals that is the entirety of our function." "You sent the right signal," she said, "on the right frequency with the right information at the right time. Do you know how many emergency signals I've seen that were too vague to act on, or too late, or missing the threat data we needed?" She shook her head slightly. "Your signal told us exactly where the distress vessel was, exactly what the threat was, exactly how much time we had, and exactly who else was responding and when. We made our decision in less than 5 minutes because you gave us everything we needed. That matters." I thought about 17 minutes on the general assistance frequency, and the 2 previous times I had sent such a request and received silence in response. I thought about the way the math had looked when I ran the intercept times, and the way Sefvel's crest feathers had moved when he read the numbers. "I did not think anyone would respond," I said. "I know," she said. "That is why we try to be the kind of people that make the math come out differently. There is one more thing I want to say before this account ends. The Karog have not made another incursion into the Caldris pressure zone in the 14 months since the incident. I do not know if this is because of the incident, or because of other strategic pressures on the Karog, or because of any number of other factors that I do not have visibility into. 14 months is not a long time in the history of contested space, and I have been in this work long enough to know that quiet periods end. But I think about what Captain Orath said during those long 3 hours. They see one vessel. One vessel, whatever its capabilities, has limits. The Karog had made a calculation. 16 fighters, 2 corvettes against 1 incoming vessel. The math seemed by every standard metric to favor them, and by every standard metric it should have. The thing the Karog miscounted, the thing that their calculation did not account for, was what was inside the vessel. Not hardware, not weapons systems, though those turned out to be more capable than their listed classification suggested. Not sensor packages or engine modifications, or any of the other hardware factors that analysts have spent considerable time looking at since. What was inside was a battalion of people who had chosen to be there, who had looked at the same math I looked at 4 hours 20 versus 6 hours 40, 16 souls adrift, and had said, simply and without drama, "We will hurry." People who had, when a Karog patrol element chose to intercept them rather than let them complete a rescue mission, closed the distance. The Karog are not given to reflection in the way that I understand that word. They are a species that values overwhelming force and considers retreat a temporary strategic choice rather than a failure. They learned something in those 11 minutes in the Cauldrus expanse. I am not entirely sure what lesson they took from it. Karog internal doctrine is not something I have access to, but they learned something. And I learned something too, about signals sent into empty space, about what happens when the math says one thing and the people doing the math decide that the math is missing a variable, about what it means to bring a full battalion to a situation that asked for reinforcements, about the specific and unrepeatable feeling of watching a single vessel turn toward an intercepting force rather than away from it, and thinking, not with understanding, but with the sudden certain knowledge that understanding would come later, in a quiet moment on a long shift when the mind wanders without direction. Oh, that is what they are. This account was compiled by 3rd Caste Liaison Officer Grakval Sor, Vethakara Relay Station, Iridian Unified Command. Filed for the Galactic Standard Archive under reference code HB 7734 Terra. All communication transcripts included herein have been verified against original station logs. All sensor data included herein has been reviewed and certified by Iridian Command Technical Analysis Division. This account is offered not as a strategic or military assessment, but as a record. As a witness account from someone who was there, or close enough to there, at a relay station at the edge of the Cauldrus expanse, watching numbers on a screen to say, "This happened. I saw it, and I want you to know what it was like to watch it." The relay station is still running. Sefvel made 3rd Liaison last year. Captain Orath got her cruiser command. The Pale Horizon completed repairs and returned to the trade corridor 4 months after the incident. We still have the letter from Captain Roseman. It is posted on the communications deck. I look at it sometimes. It starts with the words, "I don't know how to thank the people who made a single phone call that saved 16 lives." A phone call. A signal, the right signal at the right time on the right frequency. It was enough.